Then I want to have a discussion with you about why we need a multidisciplinary response to elder abuse cases um, in our jurisdictions, whichever they are, whether they're rural or urban or in between. And then I'll talk a little bit about the multidisciplinary response in King County that has developed over the years, and then finally end with a recent case for the purposes of sharing sort of a comparison between how that early case was handled when there was very little collaborative response in our county to more recently when the multidisciplinary. But back when my position was created in 2001, I was assigned the sort of three main tasks. One was to prosecute these cases. And at that time, of those 39 police agencies, only Seattle Police had a dedicated elder abuse advocate and detective. There were no other advocates in the county or in any other cities in the county. And my job was also to coordinate the community response and to train and build relationships with law enforcement, because my boss had the wisdom to know that the cases weren't going to be coming into our office until we'd worked on those other things, on training and on coordinating the many different police agencies and services that were available to victims. There were no elder abuse advocates and community-based agencies at that time. We had no elder abuse advocacy in our office. And other than Seattle Police Department, there were very few financial exploitation and neglect cases being responded to at all by law enforcement because there were no dedicated detectives. For sale sign in the window. And at that point, a man named Michael came to the door and offered him $100 down for the car and promised him that he would make payments of $100 a month after that. And Leon readily agreed. So he took the $100 cash, gave Michael the title to his car. And despite the fact that they had no written contract, Michael drove away with his car, with his wife's car. 2 days later, Michael returned, and this time he brought someone he said was his cousin, and her name was Yana. And Yana began to visit Leon from that point on quite regularly, and she would bring her daughter with him, and she would talk to him about his past career as a caterer, and she was very kind to him and very flirtatious. And I think for the first time in a long time, Leon had company and was sort of excited about life and about and his loneliness was reduced, and which she insisted on to invest in this business. Eventually, after all of that money had been withdrawn, Leon's son saw the withdrawals in the bank account and talked to his dad, and over Leon's objection called the police and APS and reported what was happening. Seattle Police, which thankfully had this elder abuse detective, responded, and they began to investigate, and they learned that both of these suspects were people that were known to us from past elder abuse cases. So they began their work on the case and did a very thorough investigation of Leon's exploitation. The APS investigation ended in a closure because Leon did not meet Washington's definition of vulnerable adult. And I think that was due to lack of adequate capacity screening for Leon. So there was just a very minimal screening test that was given him. His life savings were gone. It was very unlikely he would ever get restitution because Michael and Yana kind of lived under the radar, did not hold conventional jobs, and would likely never have their wages garnished. There was no APS involvement, no services were offered to Leon. And no one stepped forward and offered to manage his money, nor did we have anyone to do money management for him. There was no power of attorney put in place, no guardianship. So really, Leon was left in the same position he was in before the exploitation began. And I was pretty haunted by that because I felt like even though we'd had this conviction, some things were missing from that experience, at least for Leon. But I wanted to put this question to you all and hope that you can put this in the chat, and then Shelley or Talitha can read to me what your comments are. But we were able to obtain this conviction, but do you all think we achieved justice for Leon by getting that conviction? Really not oriented towards the victim, we're oriented around the defendant. There's no jurisdiction over the victim, no ability to obtain services for a victim through a criminal process. The only real orders that a court makes that even pertain to the victim are no contact orders and restitution. Everything else is centered around the defendant. And the victim has no power in the criminal process to decide whether charges will be filed, what charges will be filed, and how the case is resolved. I think with elder abuse prosecutors, we are getting better and better at listening to victims and taking their opinions and their desires more and more into account in whether and how we file charges and how a case is resolved. But traditionally, that's not something that has played a really significant role in how we've handled cases. And I think part of the reason for this is because part of what makes these cases different is that older victims tend to have complex and multiple needs. So they don't just need the offender to be prosecuted. They may have medical needs, years old, suffered from a traumatic brain injury that was a lifelong impairment for her. She was very easily confused about money and really about many things, and I think very obviously impaired. She had a lot of very hard time communicating with people, especially about money. But she had, done well enough in life that she'd gotten married. She had 2 kids who lived nearby, Travis and Tracy. And in her marriage, she and her husband had bought a home. And after the divorce, she was able to keep that home. So she lived in her own home, which was her pride and joy for many years. In June of 2020, a homeless shelter social worker called 911 to report that a year before, Teresa's son Travis had actually sold Teresa's home and stolen the proceeds of the home. She said Teresa was homeless. She was living in a motel in Seattle. She was actually, her home because it was far beyond what I could do as far as helping Teresa was concerned. And the MDT began a protracted effort to assign individual people to work with Teresa. The AAA case manager started working with Teresa and building trust with her. She coordinated with APS on APS's investigation, and they also coordinated with a detective and with me. And we really together worked on the case on what additional investigation we needed as prosecutors and on what services Teresa needed on how we could convince her to let us help her as best as we could. In October of 2021, we filed felony charges against Travis for identity theft, theft from a vulnerable adult, 2 counts of that, and mortgage fraud. Travis was still living in Hawaii at that time. He didn't show up for his arraignment, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. Also at that time, we hired a capacity evaluator for Teresa. Mainly, we didn't really need it to prove our case because it was so obvious that she was impaired when you talked to her. So it was important to our case, but we were able to prove that even just by having Teresa testify. But what we needed to figure out was what kind of services she needed, because she was still so resistant and struggling. And she would just say to us over and over, this is years long, of course, not ideal, but at least we were making some progress. And what we did in this case, and I think someone mentioned this in the comments, was we ended up making what we call a tiered recommendation to Travis. And this was because when I would ask Teresa what she wanted from the prosecution, she would say, I want him to go to prison. And I'd say, and I want my money back. I want my house back. And I would say, Teresa, we can't get your house back, but we might be able to get some of your money back. And if you had to choose between a high prison sentence for Travis and getting some of your money back, what would you choose? And she said, I would choose getting some of my money back. Not an easy choice, but it was the only way we had any chance of getting money back from him, because all the money was spent. He didn't have any assets in Hawaii. So it was the only thing we could do was think about how to incentivize for him working to repay her at least some of this money. So we made an offer where he pled guilty, basically as charged to all of the different felony charges we had filed. And we agreed to reduce his charges and his prison sentence recommendation.
Thanks for watching. If this kept you up to speed on Washington, hit subscribe and give it a like. Fresh federal briefings every single day.